Good Sunday evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Bullpen Podcast. Hope everyone's having a great August 13th. My name is Adam Kunos. I am the host of the Bullpen Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Kunos19. Don't forget to follow the show at the Bullpen Pod on Twitter as well. And don't forget to head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to the Bullpen Podcast on YouTube for all of your latest live episodes, past episodes, and much more. But thank you very much for tuning in on this Sunday evening. We are sponsored by Fanatics. Please head over to Fanatics using the Linktree link in our Twitter bio for everything Major League Baseball and back-to-school stuff, including jerseys, hats, t-shirts, office and school supplies for all of your teachers and students out there who may just want some MLB gear for their backpacks, for their office. Fanatics is a great way to get them back to school ready for Major League Baseball. So head over to Fanatics using the Linktree link in our Twitter bio. Again, good, happy Sunday to everyone. Hope everyone's enjoying their Sunday evening. First of all, I'd like to take a quick thank you to Ali Elias, who joined me last week on the Bullpen Podcast. We kind of took a little direction of the show last week and talked more about the business side of sports. We talked jersey ads, pandemic loss revenue, and just kind of what the future is for sports when it comes to advertising. So I'd like to send a big thank you to Lee for joining the show. If you did miss that podcast, please download that episode on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcast. That episode is out and available. And with that kind of change in the show direction, that's something that we're going to kind of do once we get to the offseason. Obviously, right now with baseball still going on, we're going to bring you all the best baseball coverage. We're going to talk about Major League Baseball nonstop up until the final game of the World Series. But once we get into the offseason, we will still cover some Major League Baseball because there's still going to be news to talk about throughout the offseason. But we're also going to switch it up a little during the offseason. We'll talk some NFL football. We'll talk some NBA basketball, hockey, soccer, other sports as well. We're going to talk some fun little topics. May throw in some anime topics over here. We may talk some geek stuff. We're just going to do a whole round of topics during the offseason, but we'll still mostly talk baseball when it comes to the Major League Baseball season. As you may have noticed, we are 2 hours earlier than usual. Usually we go on at 10 p.m. after Sunday Night Baseball, but we have shifted our show to an 8 p.m. start time. I'll give you that heads up. School has started for a lot of us down here in Florida, so we're just going to go ahead and shift our school times as we do have a student in the house along with the teacher in the house, so we're just trying to get back on that little school routine. So we are going to shift our show times to 8 p.m. every Sunday during Sunday Night Baseball, and hope everyone's enjoying the ESPN Sunday Night the Game. Atlanta Braves at New York Mets. I'll bring you the current score here shortly. But we are going to go 8 p.m. every Sunday live on YouTube and Twitter. And currently, our Sunday night game, the Braves do lead the Mets 3-0 going into the bottom of the third at Citi Field. All right, so we're going to jump right into the show, and we're going to start with unfortunately, a sad story to report from Major League Baseball. This past week, the Detroit Tigers did announce that they did lose their voice of the Detroit Tigers. Jim Price did pass away at the age of 81, unfortunately, but he has been a celebrated broadcaster with the Detroit Tigers. He also spent 5 years playing with the Detroit Tigers as a backup catcher. From 1967 to 1971. I'll give you a little stat update on him. 214 average, 18 home runs, 71 RBIs, OPS of 629 in his 5 seasons with Detroit, but was part of the 1968 World Series championship team for the Detroit Tigers. He had spent the last 31 years in the broadcast booth for the Detroit Tigers. Unfortunately, it is a sad loss for the Detroit Tiger family. The games that I've witnessed caught with the Detroit broadcast, he was a phenomenal broadcaster. He will be missed. Here at the Bullpen Podcast, we send our heartfelt condolences to the Price family and the Tigers organization. Once again, unfortunately, we did lose Jim Price at the age of 81 this past week. Moving on to another story, we did have a little bit of an exciting story. I know it's a little bit of a heartbreaking story there, but we're going to shift into a little bit of a fun story involving a no-hitter. So we did have a no-hitter thrown in Philly this past week. Actually, I believe it was thrown on August 8th. Michael Lorenz of the Philadelphia Phillies threw the 14th no-hitter in Phillies franchise history, the first since Cole Hamels in 2015 versus the Chicago Cubs. And this is a little bit of a cool story for this guy. He was just traded from the Detroit Tigers to the Phillies prior to the trade deadline, and this was his first home start with Philadelphia. So you talk about making a good impression with your team. You go out in Citizens Bank Park and you throw a no-hitter in front of the Philly crowd. That is a great way to introduce yourself to the Phillies and a great way to start your Philadelphia career at home. Obviously, 9 innings pitched, 4 walks, 5 Ks, but the big stat line, no hits, no runs. That is, again, the 14th franchise no-hitter. And fun fact that I kind of learned about this one, he is the 5th pitcher in Major League Baseball history to throw a no-hitter in his first home game, according to the Elias Sports Bureau. I did pick up the last 4 games. We can go with Don Carwell of the Cubs back in 1960, Jay Hughes of the Orioles back in 1898. So we are jumping back to the 1800s for these games over here. And then Bumpus Jones for the Reds in 1892, and the last one is Edge Koshman for the Milwaukee Cream Cities back in 1884. So that is a very unique list that Lorenz does join. So congratulations to him. If you've seen the videos, it's just an amazing video with him celebrating with his family. He did have a newborn at the game with them celebrating on the field. And I think the coolest part was he wears Vans on, like a brand new pair of white Vans on the rubber when he pitches. Those are now in the Hall of Fame. So if you get a chance to go to Cooperstown, he does have some gear down the Hall of Fame. It was a cool story in Philadelphia. So again, congratulations to him on a no-hitter, and we look forward to a great end of the season for him in Philadelphia. All right. Now, speaking of which, we're coming up to the end of the season. We're talking, it's August 13th right now. We got about maybe 6.5 weeks left of the baseball season. And it was just announced that the postseason schedule for this year has been released. So we're going to go through the postseason schedule. We're also going to talk the postseason logos because this is something fun to talk about. We're going to talk about what each logo design is and kind of what the history of the logos are. So we're going to start with the Wild Card Series presented by Hankook, Driving Emotion. We'll start on October 3rd and on October 5th. Now, if you're new to baseball, you're not remember the Wild Card Series is just a short 3-game series at one park. So last year it was the Rays at Guardians. All games were in Cleveland because the Guardians did have the division title. Unfortunately, the Rays did not. Last year they were a wild card team, but it'll be a quick 3-game series from October 3rd to October 5th. Wild card logo, I think it's pretty well decent. I know there's a lot of fans out there who hate the sponsorship logo in the postseason logos, but go back to our show last week. We talked about if there's space for an ad, it is going to be there. I got no issue with the ad. We've seen this before going into hockey, basketball, the NFL, soccer. Again, we talked about this last week. It's the biggest component when it comes to ads. They'll put an ad on anything. So it's just a way to pull in extra revenue for Major League Baseball, which, you know what? I'm perfectly fine with it. Shifting to the NLDS and the ALDS. Oh, forgot to mention, the Wild Card Series, all games will be on ABC, ESPN, and ESPN2. The Division Series presented by Booking.com will start on October 7th and wrap up on October 14th with Game 4 and 5s if needed. The ALDS will be shown on Fox and FS1 with the NLDS on TBS. Again, nothing to write home about these logos. I like the switch of silver and gold that you're using for the 2023 portion of the logo. I think it's a very clean logo. It's kind of similar to what they had last year. Good all-around logos. Nothing to write home about with these postseason logos. Moving on to the League Championship Series presented by Loan Depot. That will start on October 15th and end on October 24th. Again, games 5, 6, and 7 if needed. And again, all these dates are tentative. If we have any pushbacks in the regular season, I'm sure these dates will be pushed back as well. But again, the ALCS will be presented on Fox and FS1 with the NLCS on TBS, and it kind of alternates back and forth if I remember correctly. We'll post the schedule on our Twitter account, but it'll be usually kicks off with either the ALCS, NLCS, and it kind of flip-flops back and forth. And last but not least, we go to the World Series presented by Capital One. That is set to kick off October 27th and end on November 4th. Again, 5, 6, and 7 games if needed. The series will be shown on Fox. Now, looking at the World Series logo, I think it's a clean, crisp logo. You got the Commissioner's Trophy in the logo, which I'm loving that they've presented this logo with the Commissioner's Trophy and logos past. I believe going back to 2020 is when they started using the Commissioner's Trophy in the logo. I will definitely fact check myself and correct myself later. But it's a good logo. You got 2023 in gold, navy for the World Series. Obviously, you got the Capital One logo below. And the images that you're seeing on the screen are courtesy of sportslogo.net, who did a fantastic article about the postseason logos, about the World Series logos. Something fun I learned about the World Series logos. This was first introduced back in the 80s when they started wearing a patch on the sleeve for the 87 World Series. And it was a consistent patch through the 80s, 90s. We didn't get different logos until 1999 to where they started redesigning the logos every year. And I like the fact that baseball is still one of the only sports that has a different World Series logo or different championship logo every year. NHL has kind of had a standard logos for their Stanley Cup and Stanley Cup playoffs for the longest time. NFL was kind of in the way of changing up their Super Bowl logo. If I remember correctly, going back to maybe since Super Bowl I, they've had a different logo every year. It wasn't until 2010, Super Bowl 45, I believe, down in Dallas, is when they started using the standard Super Bowl logo with the trophy in the middle. Now you got the Romanized numerals on each side of the trophy. But they kind of standardized their logo design. But I like that baseball still has a generic redesigned their logo every year. I like it. It's clean, it's crisp, and it brings a little more freshness to the World Series, and I believe so. Again, the postseason is slated to start on October 3rd and wrap up if there's a World Series Game 7 on November 4th. So we'll get closer to the playoffs and we'll get you all set up for the Wild Card Series, the Division Series, League Championship Series, and World Series right here on the Bullpen Podcast. All right. Now, the big topic of this show right now, and I'm going to kind of bring up my little soapbox for this. What the hell is going on with the White Sox right now? There is a lot of issues with the White Sox. A lot of stories have come out of Chicago with issues fighting within the clubhouse, issues with the leadership, going down to ownership, front office. So what is going on with the White Sox? Personally, this organization is a complete mess right now. And I speak as a White Sox fan. I mean, I got White Sox hat, shirt, White Sox banner behind me. If you know me, I am a passionate White Sox fan. I love watching White Sox baseball. I love talking White Sox baseball. I get excited every season for the White Sox. But the last two seasons have been an extremely disappointment as a White Sox fan. Going back to 2020 when they finally made the playoffs for the first time since 2008, you can just ask my wife how excited I was to see this team in the playoffs for the first time since then. Even though they lost to Oakland in the Wild Card Series, I said, you know what? This team is just going to get better year after year. They got a good core in the franchise. They're going to be building something special, I believe. Jump to 2021. They win the AL Central. In fact, they ran away with the AL Central. That was a complete wash of that division. The White Sox just ran away with that division, ended up finishing 93-69, won the AL Central, lost to Houston, unfortunately, in the division series in 4 games. But I say, you know what? They're going to build on that. They're going to build on that going into 2022. I think we're going to repeat as Central Division champions. 2022, a complete disaster for that team. They could barely stay over 500. They were under 500 for most season. They were lucky, in my opinion, to finish at 81-81. They were absolutely lucky to finish with a 500 record, just with how awful they played that year, just with the inconsistency with the pitching, with the offense, with the defense. It was just inconsistency all around with that franchise. Going into this year, I had a little more hope, a little more optimistic hope as a White Sox fan. I said, you know what? Tony La Russa's gone. Maybe he was the issue in the clubhouse. Maybe he just wasn't the manager that the White Sox were looking for. You bring in a fresh coaching staff, going from manager down to bench coaches, third base, first base coach. You bring in a whole new coaching staff. Maybe this is what is needed to turn this franchise around. I mean, you start off with a 1-0 victory over the defending World Series champions, Houston Astros, on opening night. But then after that, it's just a complete disaster. They go on a 10-game skid, including seeing a team getting swept by Tampa in Tampa Live, which is just again, Go back to that show where I talked about the White Sox Rays live. Fun experience watching baseball live, but just awful seeing your team getting swept live in person. And this team has just been a rocky team in a downhill spiral ever since. I mean, currently they're sitting at 47-72, fourth place in the AL Central, 14.5 games back of the Twins, 18.5 games back in the wild card race. They just come off it being swept by the Milwaukee Brewers today. So there is a lot that is going wrong for this franchise, and it's frustrating. I am frustrated as a White Sox fan. It is frustrating to look at my phone to see how this team's doing and constantly see them. They jump out to a 2-run lead. They jump out to a 3-run lead. All of a sudden, I see the final score. They lose by 2 runs. They lose by a run. They lose in a walk-off fashion. It's like, what the hell is going on with the White Sox? Now, there have been reports that came out of the White Sox clubhouse that there was infighting within the clubhouse. Now, prior to the trading deadline, the White Sox were sellers at the trade deadline. I mean, they dumped a lot of pitching. They dumped 6 pitchers, and then they also dumped Jake Burger in a trade to Miami, which completely threw me off. I did not expect Jake Burger getting traded. I wish him the best of luck down in Miami, and apparently he had a nice little walk-off signal in Miami today, so I do wish him luck in Miami. But there was a report that came out that there was infighting within the White Sox clubhouse, and also Lance Lynn did kind of confirm this report, saying that Kenyon Middleton said there was fighting within the clubhouse in Chicago. Quote is saying, "We came in with no rules." This is via Jesse Rogers of ESPN. "I don't know how you police the culture if there's no rules or guidelines to be followed because everyone's doing their own thing. Like, how do you say anything about it because there aren't any rules?" There's here reports saying they have rookies sleeping in the bullpen during game. You have guys missing meetings. You guys are missing pitching, fielding practices. There's no consequences for any of that stuff. Now, the White Sox have come out and said that statement is completely false. There's nothing like that in the clubhouse. But what is there to believe, honestly, about what's going on? The White Sox were supposed to be a team with a championship window since 2020. That's something that they built since they started rebuilding this franchise back in 2016, since they brought in Yohan Moncada, since they signed Luis Robert, traded for Eloy Jimenez, Dylan Cease, brought in Lucas Giolito. They built this nice core, which I thought was going to have a great championship window. In the 2020 offseason, you bring in Yasmani Grandal to be the backstop because they've had some struggles in the backstop. You brought in Edwin Encarnacion as your DH. Obviously, he had a little bit of a down season. You could blame the COVID season for that, but they brought in him to be the DH, which didn't work out. You had Nomar Marza come in as a right fielder. It was a complete wash for the White Sox. 2021, I thought they finally fixed it. They finally got the pieces to the puzzle, and they finally have a championship team that can be contending for the next 3 to 4 years. It turned out that was only a 2-window championship season, which was completely ridiculous. You had a great core on this team. You had a lot of players to get build around. Obviously, losing Jose Abreu in the offseason to the Astros was a big blow, but you had Andrew Vaughn, who was right behind him to play first base, and he has done a fantastic job at first base. I mean, Luis Robert Jr. is having an MVP caliber season. He's looking to become the second player in White Sox franchise to have a 30-30 season, 30 home runs, 30 steals. But what needs to be fixed about this franchise? Is it the ownership? Is it the GM? I mean, Rick Hahn, who has been the GM since 2012, has endorsed 7 losing seasons, 1 wildcard berth, 1 AL Central title, a 2-4 record in the postseason. Credit, he helped the White Sox make back-to-back postseason appearances for the first time in a 120-plus year franchise. Up to that, they have never made the playoffs in back-to-back years, if you can believe it, for this franchise has been in play for over 120 years. So in my opinion, what needs to change? What do I think needs to change in Chicago? Obviously, if you read what's going on, there's a lot of sell the team chants going around, get rid of Reinsdorf. There's even a reverse boycotting and talks when the Athletics come to town later this month. And you know what, personally, I would love to see that. I would love to see the Athletics, who have done numerous reverse boycotts over in Oakland and in San Francisco because, again, they're right across the bay, do a reverse boycott. Just know that the fan base is frustrated. The fan base is over this inconsistency of a team. I mean, you look across the north side, you have the Chicago Cubs, who are probably a little more spending in the offseason. They brought in a lot more talent to that team, and it's showing. They're being competitive for that NL Central team. They've had a lot more consistency with that franchise than the White Sox had in the last 20 years. Now, grant the Cubs didn't win a World Series in 2016. White Sox fans can say, well, we won it first back in 2005, but that doesn't matter anymore. Those championship teams are in the past. That's well past where we are right now. If you're a White Sox fan, you can only talk about 2005 for so long. It's like being a Bears fan. You can only talk about 1985 for so long. You want a winning team on this field right now, and you're frustrated. I am frustrated because I want a winning team for this franchise. I hate seeing the White Sox finish in the basement of the AL Central, finishing out of the wild card race. There are 3 wild card spots up for grabs right now. We can't claim one of those spots. That's freaking ridiculous, in my opinion. If you're watching the show, I'm looking at beyond the screens right now. My wife is saying, give me a little shimmy because she is a Rays fan, and the Rays, in the 25 years they've been in existence, have more playoff appearances than the White Sox have since 2008. I mean, a little fun fact: the Rays made the playoffs for the first time in 2008, along with the White Sox. They both won division titles, met in the playoffs. Rays go on to the World Series. The Rays have had more postseason success or more postseason experience than the White Sox have had since that 2008 season. That just tells you that it doesn't matter what talent you bring in, you have to bring in some new ownership and leadership. You need leadership to help lead this team, and I think ownership needs to change. I think there needs to be a change in GM. If you want to quote me on that, follow me on Twitter at Kudos19. Let me know if I'm wrong. Let me know if I'm just kind of blowing steam right now. But again, I am a frustrated, pissed off White Sox fan, and I'm kind of sick and tired of seeing this team underperform. All right. Jumping off my soapbox, we're going to go into the bullpen picks. Now, I tweeted out that we're going to kind of do a little different kind of thing with the bullpen picks. We're going to tweet out our bullpen picks on Twitter and let you guys pick along with us. So if you're watching the show live on Twitter and YouTube, again, thank you for tuning in. Season stats right now, my wife has a 3-game edge on me, 17 series picks correctly to my 14. Last week, we both did awful. Luckily, the Mariners saved my wife from being swept with the Mariners sweeping the Angels. So we're going into this week bullpen picks, and we're going to start with the Guardians at the Reds. Now, the Guardians currently sit in second place in AL Central. I will pick up their stats here in a minute. The Reds are currently in that kind of same spot as well. So right now, Cleveland's at 57-62, 4.5 games back of the Twins, 8.5 games back of the wild card. On the flip side, the Reds are playing absolutely fantastic baseball this season. They are in a close NL Central race with the Brewers and Cubs. 61-58, 513 winning percentage, 4 games back of the Brewers. They're a game back of a wild card spot. Again, Battle of Ohio series, you know this is going to draw a large crowd. They're at the Great American Ballpark down in Cincinnati. You know it's going to be a good sellout crowd. You got a mix of Guardians fans. You got a mix of Reds fans. I have friends who are Guardians fans. I have friends who are Reds fans. So you know they're going to be talking about this series this week. It's a quick 2-game series. But game 1, you got Allen going for the Guardians, who is 5-5 with a 3.55 ERA. Ashcraft for the Reds, who is 6-7 with a 4.95 ERA. Game 2, you got Syndergaard coming over, I believe, making his second start with the Guardians, 2-5 with a 6.35 ERA. Abbott for the Reds, who's having a phenomenal season, 7-3 with a 2.95 ERA. So in the house, I am taking the Reds in this series. I think the Reds will kind of take this 2-game sweep of the Guardians and kind of make up some ground in the NL Central or possibly in the wild card race. My wife's going to take the Guardians. She likes the Guardians in this series. Moving on to our next series, a battle of division leaders coming up in Los Angeles. So we got the Brewers, who are just coming off a sweep of the White Sox, and we got the Dodgers, who are now winners of 8 straight. They are 9-1 in their last 10 games. They pretty much opened that lead in the NL West to 8.5 games over the Giants, 12.5 games over the Diamondbacks. This is going to be a good series in my opinion. It's a good 3-game series. It's out in LA. It's at Dodger Stadium. I think it's going to be a great series. Now, the Brewers have not yet set their pitching staff for the 3 games. I haven't since I double-checked. all pitchers are to be determined for games 1 through 3, but the Dodgers do have a lineup coming in. They're going Miller with game 1, 6-2, 3.89 ERA. Kershaw in game 2, 10-4 with a 2.51 ERA. Lance Lynn to close out 9-9 with a 5.88 ERA. Again, good series. The Brewers are currently 65-54, 3.5 games above the Cubs in the NL Central, 4 games above the Reds. They are 7-3 in their last 10 games. They're on a 4-game winning streak. The Dodgers, 71-46, 607 winning percentage. They're 8.5 games above the Giants, 12.5 above the Diamondbacks. 9-1 in their last 10 games, and they're on an 8-game winning streak, so they are playing hot. Run differentials, the Brewers do have a +6 run differential. Dodgers have a very impressive 136 run differential, so they're definitely outscoring opponents, and that's only behind the Braves, who have the best run differential in the National League at 194. We are both taking LA in this. As much as I painfully say this, I will take the Dodgers in this series, and my wife takes the Dodgers in this series as well. Going into our last game for this, going to our last series, we're going to pick for the bullpen picks. We're going to take a look at the Mariners and Astros. Now, this series isn't until Friday, so we do have a week to kind of analyze this and see where these teams sit at Friday coming in. So, the Mariners currently, during this podcast, sit at 63-53. They're 6.5 games back of the Rangers. I'm just going to double check that. I'm sorry. Yeah, the Mariners are 6.5 games back of the Rangers in the AL West. They're a game and a half back in the wild card race, and that's of the Blue Jays, who currently hold the 3rd wild card spot. The Astros, however, are currently 60-51. So only 3 games. They're now 2.5 games back of the Rangers in the AL West. They do have a 2.5 game cushion over the Blue Jays for that 2nd wild card spot. I'll give you an updated wild card stats right here. The Rays currently hold the top spot at 71-49. Astros currently hold the 2nd spot, and the Blue Jays hold the 3rd spot. So Seattle is a game and a half back of that 3rd wild card spot. So this is a critical series, I believe, for both the Mariners and Astros coming in, because they are fighting for a division title. They are fighting for a wild card spot. It's going to be a dog race on the AL West between the Rangers, Astros, and Mariners. So again, good series coming up. Pitching matchups have not yet been set up, but we'll tweet out pitching matchups and tweet out our picks again later this week. But we are both going with the Mariners. Again, the Mariners saved my wife last week for getting the edge in our bullpen picks. I am also taking the Mariners in this series as well. I think the Mariners will take the series. I don't think they'll sweep, but I think they will take 2 out of 3. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, that does bring us to the end of our show. I'd like to thank everyone for downloading this podcast. It is truly amazing for the support that I have received through this podcast, through your downloads, through your views on YouTube, your comments on Twitter. Thank you guys very much. Also going to shout that I guess the Bullpen now has a channel. We are now the Bullpen Podcast channel. We do have a sister podcast that goes along with this. We do have the Live, Laugh, Chat podcast, which records every Wednesday with new episodes dropping every Thursday on all podcasting platforms. If you get a chance, please download that podcast, and don't forget to download the podcast. This latest episode of the Bullpen Podcast will be available Monday morning on all podcast platforms. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. Hope everyone has a great Sunday evening, and we'll see you guys next Sunday live on YouTube and Twitter. Have a good night.